Daf Lamed Beis Amid Beis still. Maybe if we're lucky we'll get to Daf Lamed Gimel on Lag BaOmer. That would be very...
something to strive for.
See Hashem, in both Gemoras that I'm learning, Hashem is giving us something about Lag BaOmer right in there. So, here we are, almost towards the end of the page, on Lamed Beis Amid Beis. We finished the Mishnah, which talked about clearing out the oven. There's a problem that clearing out the oven of debris that was impeding the fire, or the opposite, clearing out things that were too hot, that were making things burn, is considered to be fixing the oven up. According to the Mishnah, he couldn't do it. Rashi made it clear that was somewhat dependent on the question of Makshirei Ochel Nefesh, because the Mishnah was trying to follow the opinion of the Rabbanan that hold Makshirei Ochel Nefesh is Asur, so they won't let you, so to speak, fix up the oven to promote the cooking, because that's not directly cooking, it's helping the oven, which is going to help the cooking. That's 2 steps removed. Therefore, it's called Makshirei Ochel Nefesh. And the Mishnah was being machmir like the Rabbanan, who do not allow you to do malacha for Makshirei Ochel Nefesh, only for Ochel Nefesh. But yet in the Gemora, we run into the other side of the coin, a number of Amoraim. First of all, a Beitsa that says, if we don't have any other way of cooking, we're allowed to follow the more lenient opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says you are allowed to do malacha for the sake of Makshirei Ochel Nefesh, so therefore you would be allowed to clear out the oven and fix up the oven to get it to work better for your Yom Tov needs. However, the Gemora goes on to bring other stories of the Amoraim who were following that rule, but it turns out following that rule even in areas where we wouldn't have suspected. For example, if it's just going to make better challah, it's going to cook the bread better, or it's just to prevent the duck from getting somewhat burnt along part of it. So all that's considered also mutter to do Makshirei Ochel Nefesh, to enhance the cooking of the food to that extent. That's also called, since without that the food will be inferior to some extent, that's not acceptable, and therefore I can't cook the food the way I want to cook it. That's also called I can't cook the food without doing Makshirei Ochel Nefesh, then we're allowing you to do it. So basically, you see the halacha of Makshirei Ochel Nefesh is a bit flexible. I would say we try lechatchila to follow the Rabbanan's chumrah of not doing Makshirei Ochel Nefesh, but if we have to, which can include that we feel we have to for the quality of the food, we're allowed to do malacha for Makshirei Ochel Nefesh. At the very end of this section, we're now in the part where Ravina and Rav Ashi are exchanging their views. And Ravina is saying to Rav Ashi something very interesting about a discussion that he had with Rav Acha Mihutzal. When he was talking with Rav Acha Mihutzal, Rav Acha Mihutzal seemed to say over a halacha in the name of Rav Ashi that was very makel. That was not just clearing out the oven, but was actually basically doing what we call, like we said, it's lisha. It's a kind of a kneading of a kind of a mud mixture in order to seal the oven more properly, so there no air will come in, which could somewhat damage the quality of the food. So here we're actually doing a malacha doraisa, not just clearing out the oven, but lisha is really a malacha doraisa, just like kneading dough is a malacha, but you're allowed to do it for Ochel Nefesh. Kneading mud is also the same malacha of kneading, of lisha, And here it's not ochel nefesh because it's just to seal off the oven. That's makshiri ochel nefesh. So it's being very, very lenient with a real malacha for makshiri ochel nefesh. And that's what Rav Leina had understood. It was being reported in the name of Rav Ashi that it was mutter to do. He was confronting Rav Ashi, is that really true? This is what I heard in your name.
So he holds that actually that you are allowed to remove smear on
to do makshir echol nefesh for the just to improve the quality of the oven. Basically, you're working on improving the oven, which will in turn improve the quality of the food. But that means it's makshir echol nefesh. What you're doing directly is just helping the oven, which will in turn help the food. So it's 2 steps removed. It's makshir echol nefesh. And it's a lot more than we've said in the past, because before we were talking about the Isser D'Rabbanan of Tikkun Mana. Now we're talking about Mamash Malacha D'Oraisa. It's a much bigger Kiddush. So he says to Rav Ashi, is it really true what I heard in your name? So what does Rav Ashi answer?
On my leg, so it's there.
Right?
Should I read it or? To read. Anon are kanta the paras from Chinan.
Means on, so it's like a separate word. Try to read it
On.
as if it's a separate word. And then you have another word after that, starting with Reish. Rakta. Let's take the word samchinan first, because that's like the subject and the verb, which is how we talk in English. We put the subject and the verb first. So samchinan would be more accurate in the English sentence to put first. Samchinan means, we said we had 2 possible interpretations yesterday for samchinan.
Rakta means tit.
Means on. Rakta is the bank of a river, I believe. Maybe we'll see in Rashi something slightly different. So you still have to understand exactly what Rashi is saying. Well, these words, are you explaining it or not?
Still we're from the banks of the Euphrates River. We're relying on this support.
Okay, so relying is one interpretation of samchinan. That would mean we rely on a certain thing, or it's actual leaning, right? It can mean rely on something or to lean on something. So maybe he's talking like euphemistically. We're leaning on the banks of the Euphrates River. Now, either way, we have no idea what he's really saying, because Ravina just asked him, is it really true that you're being so makel to allow these things to be done on Yom Tov? So what would he be saying? I'm relying on the banks of the river, Euphrates, or I'm leaning on the banks of the river? How's that even an answer?
He's talking about
Some kind of it must be somehow figurative. The words must be a figure of speech.
They're using the mud on the banks of the river.
Oh, so you're saying it has to do with the mud that they got from there?
Yeah, so you don't have to mix them. You don't have to.
So it's not really leaning on it or relying on it, they're using it. So you really could have said, I'm using that. It's a bit strange way of talking.
We're relying on the mud on the banks of the river Euphrates.
Relying on it, meaning if I had to take other mud that I had to, yes, mix together with water, and it would be a problem of leash, I wouldn't have allowed it.
Right.
So basically, in our language, I would have said it's more appropriate to say, we're not creating our own mud mixture, which would involve lisha. We're taking from a certain batch of mud that's already the proper texture to just apply directly onto the oven. So we're not doing an actual malacha, because it's already sort of ready-made mud.
Ready to go.
Okay, so I would think that relying on it could be kvetched in as the word that he's using, but I would have thought it would have been better to say we're actually using that mud.
Using. Some kilometers using.
No, I don't know. I'm relying on Shabbatai for a possible pshat over here. At least Shabbatai is giving a possible pshat. I'm just saying, if he's right that that's what the understanding of these words, I still would prefer a different verb, but I can swallow it. I can get by on it.
But if you say to him, well, why are you doing this? This is a Torah prohibition, mixing mud. No, we rely on mud on the river on the side of the river. And then you can say words out of place. We don't do that, but we rely on that.
I understand what you're saying. I appreciate the way you're explaining it. It makes it passable, but I still would have thought that it's more than just relying on it. That's what you're using. But I hear what you're saying. We're relying on the fact, maybe we say it a bit different. We're relying on the fact that the mud that we're using is like ready-made mud, and we don't have to mix it. Okay, I like that.
Maybe Russia would say something.
No, I like the way you're explaining it. It definitely makes it much easier to swallow.
You know, like these cement mixers that go right. We don't have to mix cement, we rely on these guys.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the truth is, we do certain things on Shabbos and Yom Tov that we're taking it out of, like, let's say, ready-made gefilte fish. Like, I'm not making my own gefilte fish. I'm relying on the gefilte fish in the bottle.
Right.
So it's like saying that's what I'm using, and not the one I have to do a malacha to. I like the way you're interpreting it. It's very nice. I just would have thought another verb would have been a bit more appropriate, but it's passable. I like the way you got me through this hard crunch. Otherwise, I was very hard put to explain. Okay, and then you also have to say chiddush that the texture of that mud is like perfect. You could just directly apply it without. And does that mean that the mud of other riverbanks were not that way, but Euphrates had a special kind of riverbank that had really special mud?
Well, this is probably where Rabbi Asher was, right?
No, I can explain that he was in Bavel. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if it's almost like saying, if it was any other riverbank, I would have had trouble. I would never have relied on it.
Why?
But because maybe that would have to be mixed. The mixing, the kneading, like imagine, you ever see kids playing with Play-Doh? They like push down on it, and you're pushing it into a mixture of the water and the mud. But he says we don't have to apply any water, and as we apply it, we also don't have to like push on it to the point where it's looked at as kneading it either. I don't know how we exactly get the mud to stick to the oven without pushing down and doing a kneading action with our fingers. Maybe that's, if we're just pressing down, it's not called kneading, perhaps. It's just if we make a mixture, then it's like kneading. Anyhow, okay, so let's see if the Rashi that we're just directly on that phrase will help us. Perhaps it will vindicate Shabbatai Marinus's way of interpreting these words.
Yeah, a long time before I had a fit going, right?
Well, you're lucky. He was a very big hero in the Gemora. Alright, so let's see we're dealing with the Rashi that's at the end of the fourth wide line of the Rashis, Araksa de Paras Samchinan, and the actual Rashi of the explanation of that is in the fifth wide line of the wide lines of Rashi. Do you want to read it?
Yep, I'll take it away.
Or, no, you read the Gemora, so you're reading the Rashi, Shabbatai? How's this
I
working?
can read the Rashi.
Go ahead.
Okata?
Arakta de Paras Samchinan.
The purpose here. So we rely on this thing. Let me see. Oh, Safato shall Parat on the banks of the river Paras. Ainu Mismachim. Mismachim we rely. It is reliable.
Yeah, it's like the
We
passive
rely on
of
it.
our Mismachim, our...
Anu Mismachim we rely on.
Yeah.
Bidabe.
I think we're supported, maybe. Something is supported. It is nismach. It is leaning on something. Anyhow, okay. Very good. So Rashi, all he really did there, you see how Rashi works? Just important to realize if you ever want to kind of master Rashi, you have to realize this is more classic style of Rashi that keeps coming up, that he takes hard words in Aramaic, and often if you're having a hard time with the actual Aramaic, Rashi will translate it directly into the Hebrew. And usually where does Rashi do that? The first few words of the Rashi. It's like he's taking the hard Aramaic, just like in a dictionary. You have the entry, and then right after the entry you have the definition. So here Rashi looks at the words of the Gemora as like the entry, and now right away he gives you the Hebrew. He's assuming everyone has a greater mastery of Hebrew than of Aramaic, which I think is true even in our day. Not just because there's Israelis who speak fluent Hebrew, but even amongst foreigners we seem to have more of a, maybe because we daven in Hebrew or whatever, we have a better facility in Hebrew than in Aramaic. So it is helpful that Rashi will immediately take those words, and it's not like he's like fitting it into a pshat. He's right away just giving you like an entry in the he's immediately supplying you with the direct translation of those words. So we had trouble with the words in the Gemora, but what we could have done theoretically is just look at the Rashi. Right away Rashi translates it into Hebrew. So now that we already figured out the words of the Gemora, this Rashi seems a bit redundant. Like, oh, I already knew that, because we worked it out ourselves. But the truth is, very often you can't work it out yourself, or it's just a lot of time consuming. And Rashi right away does that for you. It's a nice little service that Rashi renders. So that's all he really did here, if you look. Al Svas Shel Paras, that's Araksa de Paras. Anu Nismachim is Samchina. He exactly took those words and just translated it. Now he's going to explain. Now that he's gotten that out of the way, the translation, he's going to actually explain the pshat. Davar. Davar, in a matter.
In this matter, she'einu anu tzrichim legavel teeth. I don't know what the word legavel is.
That's to need.
Oh, to need mud. So we don't have to need mud.
Right.
She'safat parat tit magovel.
Megubal.
Megovel.
What does Gubal mean?
That's the passive form of the word gabel. It is needed.
Needed.
Yeah.
This is already
K-N.
prepared.
K-N.
Yeah. This is already prepared, we say.
Right. It's like it's exactly as Shabbatai was.
Needed.
It's a perfect
So Rashi
fit
did
to what
okay.
Rashi. Right. You either Rashi listened to you or you listened to Rashi. One or the other. I can't figure out which yet.
Shabbatai wrote HaKodesh.
Only because he's become Shabbatai Rabbinus.
Don't rush into that assumption.
Yeah, well, we know you had a bit of help there, so it's either one or the other. But I did appreciate your help in that you were aware of what these words mean.
Yes. And like they need the help of the Paras, I needed help from Russia.
And this mud is needed.
That's right.
A lot of kneading going here. So, this is exactly the shot. Now, it does still imply that if we would have been dealing with the banks of another river, it has a different texture mud, we may have had to do some doctoring up of that mud to get it to work, and that would have been an act of kneading. It would have been.
This word Gabel, is it a modern day?
I don't know. The truth is, I'm suspicious that that's perhaps where the word gavul comes from, because perhaps that's how they used to make a border. They would take mud, knead it up, and stretch it, big like strip of like a wall along the border. Maybe that's why they call it gavul, a border, a gavul, because they would use mud that was gavul. Of course, now when you ask someone what's gavul, they'll just say border. They won't think of the word kneading. That's what's confusing. And we see here it has like a double meaning in a sense, but I'm saying maybe it's not really a double meaning. Maybe that's where originally why they started calling a border a gavul, because that's how they showed the demarcation of a border, especially between two people, is like a strip of mud that was It's the easiest thing to take and to shape and to put, as a permanent marker. In any event, okay, so it's exactly as Shabbat had explained it, that it happens to be. So how is he really answering him? He seems to be saying to him kind of what Ravina was saying by way of implication. When Ravina was saying to Rav Ashi, "Did you really say this?" It was clear that he wasn't happy with that, right? That he didn't feel that we're allowed to be that makel on Yom Tov, either because it's a real malacha d'oraisa, and that's not as acceptable as we would have thought, even according, that we sometimes rely on Rabbi Yehuda, but not to that extent, or he felt this is not enough of a need. Like we said before, the sometimes we're doing things that are borderline, excuse the pun, right? That we're saying to improve the quality of the bread, to make sure it doesn't burn. Maybe this thing was just to keep, Rashi said, the air out. When you seal up that lid, make sure the lid doesn't have any air leaks. What would happen if the air did leak in to the oven? It would kind of, I don't know, how did you put it before? It's kasher, let's see. It's difficult. It makes the roasting difficult. Maybe it takes longer, or maybe it doesn't say it really damages it. It makes it not roast, but just it makes it more difficult. Kasher, Rashi said before. Maybe that level of need, like we said before, we're allowing you to follow Rabbi Yehuda when it's extremely necessary. Maybe that's not enough of a need. Maybe that's what Ravina was sort of astonished at. Why would Rav Ashi have let people do that, let his servants do that, if it's not really such a great need, right? To just seal up the oven and that the roasting should go much faster, let's say, or much better. It's still not necessarily as strong as the cases before. The case before would have been much more inferior quality. It doesn't say necessarily this would have been inferior quality. Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe that's why Ravina was astonished that Rav Ashi should be so makel, even when there wasn't such a great need. And we said before, the real shot is that you're allowed to do it when there's no other way. Here, that's maybe not the case. So in the end of the day, Rav Ashi said to him, "You're right. I normally wouldn't be as makel as to allow that." So they're basically agreeing with each other. Just the only question was the reality of what Rav Ashi had done. Had he really allowed a malacha d'oraisa to be done for that sake? And we're saying no. That was just a mistake of understanding the situation, right? So halachically they both agree, whatever the pshat will be, that we can't do a malacha d'oraisa, which relies on Rabbi Yehuda only the Rabbanan, or maybe it just means this isn't a great enough need. And either way, which is a pretty big difference, but either way the pshat is they both agree.
I'm going to show this to Margaret because there's a lot of need stuff here.
I'm sure that's how you're good.
She's had problems with her knees. So there's kneading and there's need.
Well, when you come back on Sunday, you'll probably say, "Now I am need." Need me.
If I come back at all, I could say.
Right.
My son sent me something video on the Facebook. So I bought my wife a birthday present. I bought her 80-wrinkle face cream. And I cannot understand why she got so sick.
Right.
So
She wrinkled up her forehead in distaste.
gave her the diplomat,
Yeah.
That's in the Jacobson family.
You know that my wife has some Jacobson blood in her. Her mother was a Jacobson. Well, her mother's mother was a Zeberman, but that had married into a Jacobson. So they used to always say, instead of saying Zeberman, they also say it's that Jacobson side of the family. They're always, whenever they kind of joke about themselves, they'll say, she has to be excused. It's this Jacobson side of the family that's coming out. There's always, like, obviously some mischievous side of the family or something. I wonder if you guys are related at all.
Reminds me of something I heard in Nafshi recently. The boy comes home, he says to his mother, I can't understand it. It's in school we're learning all about evolution. I went over and I asked him what it is. He says we come from monkeys and apes. And you tell me we come from Adam and Eve. What is it? I'm confused. He says, no. The father's talking about his side of the family. That's just very sweet. He reminded me of it.
Yeah. Well, I did hear once that the Talmidim of Rabbi Yisroel Salanter used to say the only reason that they could even dream that we came from monkeys because they never met our Rebbe.
Yeah.
If they ever would have met Rabbi Yisroel Salanter, there's no way you could ever even imagine. Because it's impossible someone that was such a refined human being, such refined midos, and such refined manner. No. It came from anything, it came from the angels, not from
Yeah.
Alright, so we have part of the answer here, which Baruch Hashem Shabbatai had opened our eyes to in advance. Still not 100% sure what the real problem is, the malacha here, or the fact that it wasn't as great a need as we would have thought. In any event, okay, so perhaps it will become a little bit more clear in the next little line of the Gemora. We have one more line to go. Let's go back to the Gemora. And we are approximately 10 lines from the bottom of the page. At the end of the line, there's a Roshei Tevos, Lahani Mili.
Okay, now, turn back on the Gemara. I'm trying to say this mud is okay. It's really prepared.
It's like ready-made. We didn't have to do any malacha to get it in shape. So that's mutter according to everyone.
Okay. Hani Mili is.
So now Hani
Hani
Mili
Mili,
would
these
be,
words apply, halacha applies.
meaning he's modifying something that we said before. So maybe because we said before, you can do some kind of a malacha for makshiri ochel nefesh if it's extremely necessary. Maybe that's what we're saying. But Hani Mili, and when is that really true?
The tea right.
Maybe he's talking more about the mud. Maybe still specifically the mud. We're allowed to use the mud of the river Pras because it's already sort of ready-made. But Hani Mili, when is that?
The tzira be'etmol.
What?
It was formed.
Maybe like he formed it, like pushed it into shape.
Already yatzar.
Right, exactly. That's what I think he's saying. Let's see if Rashi vindicates us. But the pshat would be, if this is pshat in the Gemora, that really still you're not really doing anything on Yom Tov. I mean, maybe not. Maybe you put it in the shape. Maybe that's the pshat. Like there's a circular shape it must still be in order to fit over and be a proper seal for the lid. Maybe it has to be in that shape, the shape that you will eventually use. That shape is already done. In other words, you not only have the mud on hand, but you've already formed the circle of the seal. Maybe that's the shot as well. Cold too. Now, Rashi learns as a bigger Kiddush. Rashi learns a bigger Kiddush, is what I'm saying. He doesn't say that he formed the ring yesterday. What did he do yesterday? Yesterday meaning Erev Yom Tov. He did what?
Asabo made it
Sima.
a sign. Called the tzad echad. Achel. On the other side.
Nitko. Nitak means to remove. So nitko, he removed it. There's a word even in modern Hebrew that's pretty well used called minutak. Somebody's detached. It's I want to go on a vacation, be minutak, to be sort of detached from society for a few days. Or sometimes you talk about a person being minutak, like he's just sort of off on his own, not connected to anything. So minutak, and often we talk about also, let's say you have an electrical cord that's attaching something to the wall, giving it power, like a lamp is plugged into the wall. If somehow becomes detached from the wall, you say it's minutak.
This also reminds me of that he's saying that unless you separate it to one side, that we're going to use it tomorrow.
It's like you designated it.
Designated.
So that takes care of the problem of
Muksa.
muksa,
Yeah.
which I guess we never really thought about, that why wouldn't the mud be considered muksa? If it was like I thought, that he's actually brought it home and shaped it into like a ring, then for sure it wouldn't be muksa. But he's saying even if you just left it by the riverside, you're going to actually go to the river tomorrow and get it, but you made some kind of a siman. You marked off where you're going to use, like, oh, this is the mud I'm going to use tomorrow. So that's a way of taking mud, dirt, whatever, even rocks, and designating it for use the next day. Basically, like we talk about being meichin, we usually call it being meichin, and makes it muchan, makes it the opposite of muksa, muchan. I think you're right. That's what the sound of this Rashi is. So making a siman kind of marks off where you're going to use, and then Rashi goes one step further, and then it's also detached to one side. Like you haven't just made a general sign of I'm going to take this mud tomorrow. You have to also have kind of like removed it from its original spot and moved it a bit to the side, something to show that this is the mud I'm going to use tomorrow. So therefore, if you kind of set it aside, that takes away the problem of muksa, so you can come and get it the next day. Sounds like what I was worried about. You're still allowed to do. You're still allowed to take it and kind of shape it into that seal. And I guess you don't really have to press down and on the mud in such a way that it's called kneading. You just have to kind of shape it, which is still okay. I was worried about the actual work of shaping it into the seal, that it might be still, kneading, but I guess you can do it without that. Just lay it over the cover in such a way that and press down on it, and then it will seal. Okay. So he's basically saying it's ready-made, therefore we don't have to do any kneading for the sake of this Makshiri Ochel Nefesh on Yom Tov. And we've already set it aside on the riverbank, setting it aside, away from the regular mud, which will be muksa, to be like special mud, as it were, and therefore it's not a problem of muksa. And that has to be done the day before. Obviously, that's why maybe where Rashi got the cue of what the problem was. Why would you have to do it the day before? That's when you take care of problems of muksa. In the Masechta, we always talk about doing something the day before when we talk about preparing things that shouldn't be muksa. So therefore, the word sairei, I guess Rashi's trying to deal with that word. Again, I don't feel it's the best word for what Rashi's explaining, because what Rashi's explaining is you basically set it aside. I wouldn't think sairei is needed. Sairei is a more developed verb than that. It's like Cerulli was saying, it's like from the word yetzirah, you're creating something. Right? A yetzirah is a creation. It's like you're forming something. That's why they use the word yetzer hara to talk about the evil inclination, because what it really does is it creates images in our mind. That's how the yetzer hara operates.
Fantasies.
Right. So how could you apply that to here? Rashi's not really going that far. Rashi's toning this word down, way down in his explanation. You're not really shaping it at all. You're just setting it aside. So it's a bit of a strange verb, again, to be using if all you're doing is setting it aside. Why did you talk about shaping it or creating it or forming it? You're not really forming it, you're setting it aside. Again, we're used to Rashi, since Rashi makes a lot of sense, and he explains why the Gemora is doing different things, so we rely on Rashi, but I could see another Rishon arguing and learning a slightly different shot based on the fact that this word is not 100% fitting to Rashi's shot. Just pointing out. possible difficulty there might be, but not that I'm rejecting Rashi's pshat. Just telling you to be aware that this is a bit strange. I've used that verb. If really all you meant to say, according to Rashi, was that you set it aside.
You said it's not actually formed.
Yeah, you didn't really do anything to form it. You just set it aside. Rashi says you detached it to one side or made a siman. I don't know exactly what that siman was or why you need both, but it sounds like both things that Rashi is talking about are making it clear that this isn't like the rest of the mud that's on the riverbank. This is like mud that I'm going to use. And maybe to uproot mud from the bank is also a problem of like plowing, or Rashi wants to make sure it's already removed to one side, that when you take it tomorrow, nobody can look at it as an act of plowing, right? Because that's what plowing does. It like digs up the soil. So perhaps that could be a problem that we're trying to avoid. I could hear that. But again, the way Rashi explains it, you're moving it to one side or making some kind of a sign that this is what you want, but I don't see any creation of or forming of anything really directly. Okay.
והשנה הפתעות מיוחדות. קשו מיד לתחנות ההרשמה לקבלת שעון התהלוכה.
Alright. Sounds exciting. Okay, now we have one more statement of Ravina. He's not letting up here. He's going to have the last word. Kitma.
Didn't say that sounds familiar, this word?
It is a familiar word, but I think you have to find the right place where it makes sense. If you know the word, I would be astonished, but if you think you know the word, try it out.
Ashes?
Good, very good. The ox created its own ashes to roll with, to heal itself. Very good. Very good. It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's he trying to say? If it's ashes, it's permissible. Is he trying to say, again, if you're going to somehow use ashes, I guess there is such a thing as adding water to ashes and creating kind of a paste of sorts, and then you could use that to seal up the oven. Is that what he's saying? Then you could actually do it on Yom Tov. Is that what he's saying? If you're going to use mud, then you really do have to do it the day. You just have to use a special mud that's already ready-made or whatever. But he's saying kitma is mutter because you can do that. You can even add water to it and make it into a paste on Yom Tov. Is that what he's saying? Or maybe he's saying the other way around. We said there's a problem with mud that you have to go the day before and mark it off so it's not muksa. But maybe he's saying, but kitma, you don't have to worry about that. It's not a problem muksa anyways.
Means Torah. Where's the Torah?
You're looking at Rashi now? It's cheating. Okay, let's give Shabbatai a chance to do the Rashi then. Kitma Shari.
Kitma Shari.
Well, so Rashi's going to the one shop that I mentioned. He's learning that Ravina's Chiddush here, his heter with the ashes, is in the arena of what? Of kneading. Not regarding the question of muksa and going the day before and trying to avoid the problem of muksa. He's saying if you use ashes, you can actually knead it. Right? The whole problem of kneading is when you need something like mud or obviously flour. Flour is a problem with kneading, although you're allowed to do it on Yom Tov. But kneading mud is a problem that Rav Ashi agreed. They can only use like mud that's already of the proper consistency, and you don't have to really knead it. But he's saying, but if you use ashes, then you can actually add water and mix it together, and it won't be a problem of hibul. And the other thing, latuach. Latuach is actually smearing it on, right? Smearing something is another malacha, right? That's why they say there's a problem of using toothpaste on Shabbos, because when you squeeze the tube, it kind of smushes out the cream. That's like a malacha, smearing. Alright, so Rashi's picking that side of the fence. That when he says keep Lashari, he's trying to be Mechadish in the arena of kneading and smearing. It becomes suddenly mutter because you're working with ashes. So why is ashes better?
It's not kneading. It's not
a bar. Bar means like something of which is a material that could apply gibul, right? This doesn't even apply. Like bar means like to be applicable, to be like a son is from a certain family. So you say, he's from that family. He's from that that group. But here we're saying it's not even from that group of things which are shaykh gibul. So there are some halachas that are specific to certain, for example, it could be he's saying that it's only things that grow from the ground that actually have the problem of kneading, mud or flour or other things. Sometimes we have rules like that in malachas that it's only applicable to what's called gidulei karka. Could be that's what he's hinting at. And ashes, even if it's, let's say, from a piece of wood that did grow from the ground, but that's not really what ashes represent. They don't represent a tree anymore. They're not a tree. They're a whole new item. This new item is not considered to have grown in the ground. So therefore, when you knead it together, maybe it doesn't apply the malach of lisha, of gibul.
So why do they be missing all of a sudden?
Because we were just talking about the problem of trying to seal up the oven to make it work better on Yom Tov. And we came to a conclusion that to start from scratch, mixing mud together and smearing it on is usr, like Ravina understood. And therefore he was right. Rav Ashi would never have matered that. But now that we're talking about this whole subject of what are you really allowed to do to seal up the oven to make it work better on Yom Tov, so now we have one example of what's mutter. You take ready-made mud that doesn't have a problem with being muksa either, and you just lay it over the edge of the cover and you seal it up. That's mutter. Now we're saying, but that still required you to have the mud that was like ready-made, that was the proper consistency, that you don't have to do any kneading. So that's pretty restrictive. If I don't live by the riverbanks, what am I going to do? Right? How am I going to cook on Yom Tov? So he doesn't say, nowhere does it say in our sugya that if you don't live by the riverbanks, then you can you make your own mud, right? That's when the Gemora is not going to that point, right? You could have said, well, we already said if it's not possible to do it any other way, it's mutter to do makshir yochel nefesh. And you would have thought, well, if I live by the Euphrates, I don't have to do it because I can just take the mud right from the Euphrates banks of the river. But if I don't live over there, I live far away from a river bank therefore I have to mix my own, maybe I'm allowed to. It seems like we never really go that far. We remain with Ravina's question that how could you permit it, and nobody's in the end saying it's permissible. So all we're saying is that if you don't have that mud of that particular river, you have to either make it in advance or just rely on a cover of the oven that's not sealed properly. So Ravina, I think, is saying, but that's not really nice to just leave Klal Yisrael without a way of sealing up their oven. So he says, by the way, this whole problem that you see Ravina was worried about, and he thought Rav Ashi was being makel on, but turns out he wasn't. But the problem was doing the malach of lisha, malach of kneading to create a substance which will be used as the seal of the oven. So Ravina is saying, I know I made it sound like, it's usr, and I'm not really backing down on that per se. If it's something that really is a malacha of lisha, no one's allowing you to do it. But at the end of the day, if you use a different kind of substance, like like almost like a man-made thing called ashes, then it's not shayech the malacha of lisha. Therefore, you're allowed to do it. So anyone who is in a situation they don't have the ready-made mud for whatever reason, then they don't have to worry. They're not going to be up the creek without a seal on their oven. They can use this for the seal of their oven. They can make like a homemade version of the mud, which would be made out of ashes. Probably a bit inferior, probably not as good as mud, but it still creates a kind of a paste which can be used to seal up the oven, and then you probably have a reasonable substitute. So he's basically not. It's a beautiful sign actually that when somebody tells everyone something's forbidden, which is a bit harsh, right? And so you don't always like to be the bad guy who told everyone that they have to be, prohibiting on Yom Tov something they would like to use. So the best thing is, as a posek or as a rav, is to try to find an alternative, right? If all you do is tell someone something's forbidden, you're kind of like a mean guy, like you don't care about them. So a proper rav will say, yeah, that's true. I'm telling you something's forbidden that you might have thought was permissible. I have to clear the air. I have to tell you it's really awesome. But I know I don't want to leave you in the lurch. So I'm going to tell you there's a reasonable alternative. That's the proper rav. A proper rav doesn't just leave his congregation in the lurch. He tries to find for them a reasonable alternative, so that which they're used to or that which they want to have is not out of their reach. It's still within their reach to get an oven working at the higher level of efficiency, but they're going to have to use a different substance.
They don't feel that their goose is being cooked.
No, their fate is being sealed.
They're sitting ducks.
Their fate is being sealed.
So he allows you to use ashes, and the Ravina was concerned about ashes being Michael.
Right, so nobody's backing down on that. Kneading mud or other things that are shaykh the malacha of gibul would be asur. No one's allowing you to do that. So you have only one or two alternatives. If you happen to have ready-made mud that you don't have to actually do gibul to, for whatever reason, if you live by the Euphrates or some other riverbank, it might be easy to set aside beforehand, or perhaps just to make a mixture of mud beforehand and keep it on hand. But he's saying if you don't have that, if you don't have ready-made mud of any sorts that was either made before or that is available in your vicinity, so then you can try to use a reasonable alternative. Take ashes and make a mixture of that. And that's permissible. Okay. So we're ready to go on then?
Yes.
Okay, who's reading the new section then? We're starting the new section, which is about 8 lines from the bottom of the page. There's a set of 2 dots, and then a small phrase, and another set of 2 dots, which implies that we're quoting another little snippet of the Mishnah and trying to explain it. So lo and behold, what do we have here? We have a quote from the Mishnah. What's the quote from the Mishnah? Who's reading? But this is the part of the Mishnah that said what? We're not allowed to surround, okay, which we have to just explain what we're surrounding, but we're not allowed to use 2 barrels to surround, right? Which means putting 1 barrel here and 1 barrel here, and then putting the pot across the top of it, with the fire obviously burning in the middle. So somehow or other, you have a fire in the middle that's not going to burn the barrels. You can put the barrels on either side of the fire and somehow they won't get burnt, but you can suspend a pot over it, just like a tripod would be good to use if you had a tripod or some other contraption to keep the pot suspended over the fire. But if you don't have that, you'd want to use 2 barrels. Apparently that was like a makeshift tripod of some sort. So you would want to do that. Comes along the Mishnah and says what? Not allowed. Why are you not allowed? Do you remember the Rashi's shot in the Mishnah? Why? It actually says in the Mishnah, it says a little bit more. It says you're not allowed to do that, lishpos alehem kedera, to rest upon them a pot, right? Which is the way we just explained it. But in the Mishnah, there's actually words, lishpos alehem as a kedera.
He's putting the fire between the 2 barrels.
Yeah, but that's where the fire is, but that's not what the word lishpos means. Lishpos means to place a pot over the fire, to place a pot on the oven. I don't know if you have a verb like that in English, where you take a pot or a pan and you put it on the oven or put it on the fire. Do we have a verb for that? We just usually say it in the longhand version of it in English, right? We put the pot on the fire. We don't have a separate verb for that. But Rashi says lishpot is actually with the tav, not with the tes. With the tes it means to judge. But lishpos means to set a pot or a pan on the fire. There is such a verb in Hebrew for that. In any event, so what did Rashi say? What's the real problem? Where did he discuss that? Yeah. Towards the end of that Rashi, right? You see the Rashi, lishpos?
Lishpos.
Actually, 2 Rashis. One, lishpos alehem kedera, and then the next one he actually discusses the word lishpos. I don't even know if we did these Rashis, I'm not sure. But
Are you looking in the Mishnah?
in the Mishnah. Why is it asur? Rashi said in the Mishnah, lishpos, he explained what the word means. Lahoshiv kol hoshavab kedera ala'ura kari shvisa. Whenever you put a pot on the fire, it's called shvisa. Kishein lo kli barzel shakorin charpit. Right, when you don't have a tripod. Yeah, must be. Well, Old French, even modern French and English are very similar. Many words are similar. That's why it is actually helpful to read the Old French, and sometimes you can make out what the English equivalent is. Osha ein lo kira, you don't even have an oven, right? If you don't have an oven or a contraption called a tripod, because a little of the usr law, well, this is the important part. Rashi here actually explains why did they make it forbidden? Why is the Mishnah making it forbidden? So now we have Rashi at the very end of that sort of more dictionary type of Rashi. At the very end, strangely enough, Rashi starts to explain the reason. So it's sort of like hidden in a Rashi that's more like a dictionary Rashi, telling you the word, what the word means. At the very end, Rashi actually gives the pshat in the Mishnah, which to us is probably more significant to understand why they forbade it on Yom Tov. You have the Rashi at the end there. You have the beginning of the Rashi. The first word in the line is lishpos. Lishpot, with a tav at the end. In the Rashi, in the Mishnah. Okay, so it's a little bit past the halfway part of that Rashi on the Mishnah. Okay? There's one line that starts with the word kedera. Do you see the word kedera at the beginning of the line of Rashi? Next line, lishpos.
Yes, I got this.
Now, most of that Rashi is just to explain the word lishpos, how it means to set a pot or something on the fire. Okay? Then at the very end of that, the last 2 lines of that Rashi, right in the middle, he said, V'asar la. You see that?
Yeah.
Shabbatai, you see that Rashi that we were just referring to has maybe 8 or 9 lines to it. And most of them are to explain the word lishpos, but at the very end of that, just before the next Rashi, which is Ein Somchim Kedera Babikas,
Yeah, I got that one.
just before that, 2 lines before that, right in the middle it says V'asar La.
Yes, I got that.
So that is Rashi's now explaining the pshat in the Mishnah. Why would they forbid it? What they have? What problems do Chazal have with putting 2 barrels, near the fire and all of that? Rashi says Asar La. The Mishnah forbade it. Yishum dedami lebinyan, because it resembles building. Right? That's normally how you build. You put up like 2 walls and a roof. So. Midrabanan, it's only Asr Midrabanan, it's not a real active building. Mishum de Mexica Ahala. Again, Rashi switches to Aramaic, but he's saying basically the same idea. It looks like you're creating an ohel, which means it looks like you're creating a structure of some sort. So even though it's not really a problem of ohel, it's not really a problem of binyan, Rashi said it's only Midrabanan. But that's how many Durabanans work, that it looks like you're doing something and someone could see you and get mixed up, and they could think, oh, it's mutter to create a building or an ohel on Yom Tov. And that's why Chazal didn't want to allow it. Not that they really have anything against this per se, but it looks like something else that's a more usher, and therefore people might get mixed up, people might make a mistake, and they might end up doing binyan on Yom Tov. So all that was in the Rashi and the Mishnah. For all I know, the Gemora could be saying exactly what Rashi just said. Sometimes that happens. Rashi gets it from the Gemora, and then we're going to get to the Gemora and see it says the same thing and be disappointed, but that's where Rashi got it from. Or maybe the Gemora is just going to assume what Rashi just said is like an understood thing, why it's Asur, and go on to a new topic or extend it. So now we have my curiosity is picked. What are we going to be adding to what we just saw in the Mishnah and in the Rashi? So now we're ready to read the Gemora on that. Right. First we have to understand what the quote is talking about, and then we can start the actual Gemora on it.
Making an ohel or
It's mechzeh.
flat.
Looks like. It's a marasayin. Looks like you're doing the wrong thing. Looks like you're building a building or making an O or whatever. So the Rabbanan mastered it. Okay?
Yes.
Comes along the Gemora. Who's reading the Gemora? Amar Rav Nachman.
I'm reading Rav Nachman. Avanim shel Beitsa Kisei. So as it belongs to Beitsa Kisei. Mutar letzadin beyond.
Tzaddan.
Tzaddan beyond. They're allowed to move them to face him.
Yes, I believe you're right. To place them is like moving them on their side, maybe turning them on their side, or maybe turning them to the side. Maybe, like you said, you're putting it on either side of the fire. Maybe that's also included with tzaddan. So basically, you're taking rocks that are not normal for using here in this situation, and you're using rocks that probably most people would not use. So therefore, maybe there's less of a chance that someone's going to think you're actually making a building. It's based on what Rashi said in the Mishnah, that the problem is it looks like you're building. Perhaps that gave Rav Nachman the understanding of why this would be mutter, because here maybe people aren't going to make a mistake. They see using the rocks from the bathroom, from the toilet, they're not going to think you're making any building out of that. Maybe. Let's see Rashi. What's the pshat according to Rashi? Avanim shel Beitsa Kisei. Shabbatai, are you helping us with the Rashi? Everyone see the Rashi there?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Mitzadadin.
These are these large stones or bricks that you put aside.
Yeah. No, not you put aside, that you position. You put. Maybe it means you turn them on their side, or you position them around the side.
Or turn them.
Yeah.
Kamin
Moshav.
Kamin Moshav Chilul.
Chalu. A Moshav is a.
Moshav is a house.
Even in modern Hebrew, you have a lot of translation of the word Moshav, right?
Collection.
No, Moshav is from the word Yoshev. Okay, so the verb of sitting is Yoshev. Right?
Yeah.
Ani Yoshev.
Yeah.
But if you want to talk about a place where people do sit, it's called a moshav. Okay, now, why do we call a place out in the countryside where people live as a moshav? Because it was what's called a settlement. That's what we call it in English, right? Because people have settled there, they dwelt there, so we are using the verb more as settling. Like, Yoshev can also mean to settle. Not just to sit per se, but also to settle. But when it's using it in this context, he's actually talking about a moshav is also a place where you sit. Basically like a toilet seat.
Moshav is from where you sit.
It's a place for sitting. It's a place for sitting. Right? A moshav is where you do your sitting. So yoshev is the verb, but moshav means it's a place where you can do your sitting. So Rashi says it's a place where you could sit, and it's chalul. It's hollowed out. So it sounds like a toilet bowl to me. Right? Or if you consider that maybe they didn't have a proper toilet seat like we have, just rocks where you sit on those rocks, but there's a hollow space in the middle for the feces, etc., to fall into. So those same rocks that most people would use for a toilet, some people could also take it and then put it where the fire is, right? Because you also have the same thing that they create like some kind of a roundish surface around the fire, let's say, with the hollow in the middle for the fire. So let's say you could use that. That's what Rav Nachman seems to be saying. It's a plural verb, which means people do that. It's a present tense verb in the plural, which means like people do that. People sit on these rocks, meaning on the seat which is created by these rocks. Sadot.
On the side.
In fields.
Oh, in fields.
I would say it's what the modern equivalent of a porto saying. Way out in the fields, we have nowhere to actually go, and it's very uncomfortable to find a place to go. So you bring these rocks out, and you have a portable portable toilet. Anywhere where you don't have the proper facilities that normally in a settled area you have a place where everyone can go to do it, where it's already been set up, it's been created for that. But this kind of little setup, these rocks which are in the formation of a seat, which have a hollow in the middle, so these are perfect portable toilet. So Rashi seems to say that's what it's normally used for. It's normally used for sitting on to go, what we call to the John. At least that's what we call it in America. That's why some people say I'm going to the Pope. There used to be a Pope John. Now you have to say I'm going to the Francis. So now I would say I think it's pretty disgusting, and I wouldn't want my pot sitting on that. But I guess if you have nothing else to rest the pot on, to have it hanging over the fire, like Rashi said in the Mishnah, you just don't have the wherewithal to cook your food. So this will be the makeshift, not only toilet, this will be a makeshift fireplace.
So we're potty.
Why?
Oh.
Very good.
Anyways,
You have to collect all these together and then publish it.
Yeah, in the back of the
And we'll have the authors listed Shabbatai Marinus.
It's going to be a name, like Shabbatai.
People know that seed. They'll think you're Shabbatai Jacob. They don't realize.
The bestseller.
It could be. Maybe at least. It depends which field you're in.
I even signed the copy.
Yeah. Okay. Anyhow, Rashi says, last few words of Rashi here.
It's a special place.
I guess, wherever you go to camp or whatever, you have a place set aside. Kind of like the Torah says, you should have a special place outside the camp right? Because we have a chiyuv of keeping our machane kadosh, right? Ve'ayu machanecha kadosh. We have a chiyuv to make sure places where we normally daven, etc., are clean of any feces. So the Torah tells us to make sure we go out of the camp to go to relieve ourselves. So
why are we talking about this?
He's making nothing clear.
these are special rocks. That's what we're saying. These rocks are, I imagine, they're like a bit curved. Okay, they're big rocks, but they're maybe curved. And when you put them sort of near each other, that creates a perfect place for sitting, especially since they have a hollowed out spot in the middle. And you can use them for a toilet. So the normal usage was to save them for when you go on a trip to the, to these areas that don't have the proper facilities. You bring these along, so you have them. Let's say in your backyard in the shed, you have them. If you'll ever need them for you going on a trip somewhere, where you're going to need to bring your own facilities, you have them there. So maybe on Yom Tov, Rav Nachman was saying, if you have these rocks sitting in your backyard in the shed, maybe that's part of the Chiddush. Remember we had a case like that where someone used to store, what was it? Something in the back?
Yeah, wood.
Wood.
Yeah.
And there was a whole question, if you store it there, you don't really think you're going to use it, maybe it's muksa.
Not a common use.
Right, so there's a bit of a machlokas about that. So maybe this would be a bit of a Chiddush. Part of the Chiddush of Rav Nachman is to say, even though, it's set aside for something else, which maybe you don't even use it, unless you're going on a trip to the outback, as it were. So, but you can use it on Yom Tov because they have this other usage as well, that they're perfectly shaped and perfectly hollowed out in the middle to create a makeshift oven as well.
Aesthetically, it doesn't sound right. Aesthetically, it doesn't sound right.
I mean, you wouldn't,
Distasteful.
Yeah, I personally would kind of retch. What do you call it? Retch. I wouldn't feel so comfortable using it. Which there is an issur in the Torah of doing something that's disgusting called bal tishaktzim. You're not allowed to do something that's disgusting. So I guess Rav Nachman felt, at least in their day and age, those rocks. Maybe the rocks are kept very clean, and when you go on a trip, you take them with you, and they do become foul. But maybe during the normal course of the year, you keep them clean enough to use for some other usage. Just they're so specifically shaped and so specifically formed as to really only have one normal usage to sit on it and etc. But maybe he's saying if you keep it clean enough, and it's not a problem about the shocks of being disgusting, and you're kind of like at a loss of somewhere to put your pot to cook your food, you can use these things. Bal tishaksu. Bal means don't. Tishaksu means like do something that's disgusting. Sheketz, right? We talk about sheketzi, the sheketzu lechem. It's like a toiva. Toiva is a more stronger word, I think. Abomination. That's even stronger. Yeah, it's the same kind of idea. Yeah. So basically, this prohibition prevents us from doing things which are kind of disgusting. In fact, you have a gray area where someone says, look, for me, I'm not really disgusted. I'm kind of a tough guy, but most people will be disgusted by it. So it could be it's still usher. Plumber. Well, we're talking about using something.
He's in the business. What? He's in the business. Yeah. Hi.
How you doing, David?
Baruch Hashem.
Nice to see you.
Hi.
Right, how are you?
I'm especially happy because now Matt is in such a good mood because he learned with you.
Okay. Not the show just got inundated by me.
Well, it's going to take him a week to, digest it all. But
Muscles.
Do you want to take some of the newsletters with you now, so you don't have to worry about it tomorrow? Thank you.
So you want me to put it? So I'm just going to put this in.
Yeshiva and Netzach.
Thank you.
You'll have a great day. See you tomorrow.
Be well.
Thanks.
A lot of people that in the office in hospital.
Well,
Sending it on tonight.
She deserves a break. Probably will be home tomorrow. Nice. You know, it's really said that the baby was eating more. Seems to eat more from him.
A little bit more.
Maybe sing for her.
I see watching.
She likes
But
that.
you're not feeding her like candy floss and stuff like
No, I'm really saying
that. Ice cream.
I'm trying to get her soft cream. Get sugar into the system.
Alright.
Imagine me spending 5 days in hospital. It's crazy.
Imagine spending all your life in hospital. Some
You
people say to me, I wish I could go home. I said, listen, I arrived here in 2002.
But you get to go home, these nurses have to stay the whole night.
Yeah.
Yeah, shouldn't.
No, it's
Yeah, yesterday he relieved his wife so she couldn't get a good night's sleep.
No, she didn't. She said tonight she's got out.
Are you staying here tomorrow?
Yeah.
Alright. So it's a shame, should be for the good.
Actually, my corona one was celebrated, usually.
The singer songs about Nafshi. Are you high?
With the bass knitter, I'll take you to the shore.
Just sing the songs. That's what they like. The biggest thrill of a child is when the father's best friend. Most girls look up to their father. Most girls look up to their father. The biggest thrill is when the father bothers to spend time with them. Most girls will tell you that that's what they dreamed of all their childhoods, the father would spend more time with them.
Sing in the shore, take you to the shore.
If you want.
To bring a sitter with.
I don't think you said it was there.
No, I'm
I was
saying
there last week.
upstairs.
Huh?
In מחלקת ילדים, I'm going to sit there.
I was there, getting sick. Yeah, sick.
Let me take it up.
I was going to stay there sick.
Alright. You can teach her the Gemora.
The girls back there, that week.
Tell him a story. Tell him about the wife of Rabbi Chia, who all he had to do was tell her, I like better bread, and she knew exactly what to do. I think it's the best story to teach
I
girls.
suppose girls today would not appreciate that.
If he starts early,
What was wrong with it? The period?
that's what I'm saying. If he starts with her early, well, I hope.
What the bread wasn't good enough. What's wrong with it?
That's the point. If they're raised on stories like this, they'll turn out well. Alright, in any event, Rashi was very, very descriptive here. He gave us a lot of clues as to what Rav Nachman was saying. So apparently that's not a problem that will look like you're creating
Multi-purpose stones.
yeah. But no one's going to think you're making an oh hell, it's not going to have that problem. That's also must be excluded in what Rav Nachman is saying. Okay, let's continue on. Now we have someone not so happy. Esve Rabba, or some gears to say Rabba.
Rabba.
We have Rabba, but on the side it says some people have the gears of Rabba.
We're
We're Rav Nachman.
I say Rabba Rabba asked a question as an attack.
No, it's not an attack. That would be maski. It's just it's a kasha, not exactly an attack. Usually maski just mean attack from logic. It's not. It's bring a Beitsa usually, which would tend to contradict, and therefore if Rav Nachman is in the Mora, if it turns out that Beitsa is contradicting him, he'll be in trouble. So on the surface, bring against Rav Nachman, Rabba had a Beitsa that would seem to contradict Rav Nachman.
Rabbas or Gemora?
Yes, these are all Amoraim. Rav Nachman's an Amora. Whether it's Rabba or Rabba, they're both Amoraim. The question is, which one was more likely to have asked a question on Rav Nachman? Very often you have Rabba and Rav Nachman coming together, I believe. But less common have Rabba and Rav Nachman, so perhaps that's what some changed the gears.
I said Rabba Nachman. Lishpos aleim.
Lishpos.
Aleim is fidel. Now I just want two barrels together to place upon the bar of top.
You know where he's quoting it from?
The Mishnah.
Our Mishnah, right? All he did was bring our Mishnah. So he's saying to him, look, you want to allow people to do this, but it says the Mishnah is usher to bring two things closer to the fire and putting a pot on top of it. So the fact that it's like a makeshift toilet normally doesn't, according to Rava, that doesn't help you because it's still the act of putting one rock on this side, one rock on that side, and putting the pot to cook in the middle is still the general way that people would build, putting a wall on this side, a wall on that side, and a roof over it. So, according to Rava, our Mishnah is contradicting Rav Nachman. So, the way I would understand the conversation to go, it wasn't that Rav Nachman was saying, I know we have a Mishnah, but this gets around the problem of the Mishnah. It must have been, he was just getting up and saying it's mutter. And when Rava heard that, he said, but wait a minute, the Mishnah says not to do it. He didn't think that it makes a difference because it's a toilet, this, that, and the other. So maybe that's going to be Rav Nachman's answer. But right now all we have is, Rav Nachman just said you're allowed to use these, and Rava said, why? You're still doing something very similar to what the Mishnah forbade. You're putting on one side of the fire one big structure, and on the other side of the fire another structure, whether it's a barrel or it's stones from this toilet, who cares? You're still doing something that's very similar, the way Rashi explained it in the Mishnah, very similar to the act of building. So therefore, if Chazal forbade it, they should forbid this as well. So obviously Rav Nachman knew the Mishnah, and he's going to have to explain why this is different than the Mishnah.
So Rav Nachman said, Amalei, I say back again.
Right.
She'ani ha'sham nishum dakavi ohel.
Did Ka'avid Allah
Yes, I said back to no, it's different.
over there.
Because that's like building a...
Right. He actually says you're building an ohel. Rashi in the Mishnah said it looks like you're building an ohel. So he didn't explain why this is different, but he just seems to say what I was thinking he was originally saying is that a toilet can't be interpreted as making a building. Right? Using two sides of a toilet, no one's going to think you're building a building. It makes much more sense according to Rashi that the whole problem was mechzi ohel, and now it's not mechzi, it's not looking anymore. So it depends on what people look at it as. Whereas if it's an actual ohel, so why would it make a difference if it's two big rocks from a toilet or two barrels? So it's much better the way Rashi explained in the Mishnah that it's not really making an ohel, it looks like. But then we could say this doesn't look like it.
What's he using? He uses mechzi?
Mechzi means it looks like. And the word chazeh. And I kept telling people that the word chazeh, we know it from the Navi, like Chazon Yecheskel, Chazon Yeshayahu. These Naviim start their vision with the word vision. This is a vision of Yeshayahu. This is a vision of. So even in Tanakh we find it. You know where we find? I realize it's in the Shmon Esrei.
Shabbat Chazon.
Shabbat Chazon, because we read Chazon Yeshayahu. We read that parsha that starts with the word Chazon. But I found that it's actually in the Shmon Esrei. I realized I don't have to go all the way to Tanakh to bring a mashal of this word. We have it already in the Shmon Esrei, right before the Modim, at the end of Ritzei, we say, V'sechazena einenu. May our eyes see, B'shuv v'chalatziyah. We're davening that our eyes should see the return of Hashem to Tzion. There's a good example of it shows you that when we daven Shmona Esrei, we either don't think about the words that much, or it's so common to us that we hardly reference it when we're trying to think out of the box. But the truth is, with Sechazena we say 3 times a day, and even on Shabbos and Yom Tov, it's part of the Shmona Esrei. So we do see this verb quite a lot. So it can mean to see, but also can mean in the passive to appear. Just like in Hebrew, ro'eh and nir'eh are see and appear. So this is often a problem that Chazal talk about something looks like something wrong is going on, and then Chazal are up in arms because they don't want it to even look like something bad is happening. Okay, let's see what Rashi says. How is Rav Nachman defending himself that in the Mishnah you take 2 barrels, it looks like you're making some kind of an ohel, Whereas over here it doesn't look like it. Why? He doesn't really explain why. Maybe Rashi explains why. Over there in the Mishnah where you're taking 2 barrels, putting the pot on top. Yesh lo gag. It has a roof. Meaning I put a barrel on this side, barrel on that side, and a pot on top. I've done exactly what a building is. Wall, and a roof. So he said that's why Chazal made it usher in the Mishnah. He seems to be saying it's an actual ohel, whereas Rashi seems to say it only looks like it. But okay, let's put that to the side for a minute. How is this better? How is this better? I was learning that here he's saying you can take the 2 rocks and put the pot on the top. But Rashi says over here, no. Hacha, val hacha.
Here it doesn't have a roof.
Doesn't have a roof. Now, if the roof was the pot that you're putting on top, is that what we're saying over here? That you took the 2 rocks and you want to put the pot on top? That's what I thought he was saying. That's what I thought Rabbi Nachman was permitting. But I don't think that. I think now he's actually talking about creating a toilet. That's the pshat in Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman didn't come to say you can use this for your makeshift oven. And then it would probably be a question of Baal Tashaksu. It would be a bit disgusting. He was actually saying if you have a problem, you don't have where you happen to be a toilet, you could take these 2 rocks and use them, right? Even though it might be a problem that it's a little bit like building something. So that's what Ravina asked him. Who was it? Rava. Rava asked him. He said, "Look, you're taking 2 rocks on either side, and you're sitting on top of it. Isn't that the problem in the Mishnah? Taking 2 barrels and putting a pot on top?" He said, "No, because over there, when you put the pot on top, you're taking something that really is like a roof, and you're putting it on top of the structure. But here, when you sit on the toilet, that must be the pshat. You're not talking about using it for a makeshift oven, like in our Mishnah, because that would still be a gag. If the pot is a gag, it would be a gag on a pot of a potty, right? So he's not talking about that. He's actually talking, when he's talking about using this, he wasn't talking about using it as a makeshift for the fire, like our Mishnah. Then it would still be a problem. You have a gag. The pot is a gag. But no, he's talking about using it as a toilet taka. So he's saying, is this allowed to make this and to sit on it on Yom Tov? To position it and to sit on it. Maybe that's like making a gag. He's saying, no, there is no gag. You are not a gag. When you sit on it, you're not creating a gag.
Why would he be saying that if the mission is talking about putting a pot or cutlery? That's what the mission says. Don't put a pot on.
Right. Well, he thought they could be comparable. When you put 2 things on either side and then you sit on it, maybe that's the same problem as the mission. We took 2 barrels and put a pot on it. Maybe you're looking at it as I could be the roof. I'm creating a roof. There is such a concept that a man could be considered an ohel. For example, tumas ohel. What's tumas ohel? The dead body's tuma rises and hits the roof and spreads out. If you do that with your body, it still works. That's still called tumas ohel. If you're towering over, that's why a Kohen is not allowed to go into base akavaros, because their body itself would be the ohel. So there is such a thing. Maybe he thought, it should be usher because your body's like a gag. He's saying no. And with Rashi, it's much better actually, because Rashi said in the Mishnah, what's the real problem? It looks like you're creating an ohel. So he's saying, yeah, you take a barrel on one side, barrel on the other, and you put a pot over it. It really does look like you're creating some kind of a structure, a wall, and a roof. Whereas when you take a rock and you sit on it, nobody's going to think you're making an ohel. There's no gag. You're not a gag, right? A human being is not normally a gag. So if you're worried about how it looks, no one's going to think you're making a gag by sitting on it. Maybe that's the shot. Okay, we'll stop here.